on the front lines of the drug war in Massachusetts.
What is it like in here now?
It's El Salvador. It's a third world country.
From tracking gangs in El Salvador,
the most dangerous and most violent individuals that we have ever encountered,
to cartels in Mexico.
Ground zero on the heroin production.
Boston 25 News in depth on the international moves being made to keep our streets safe. Here now, Boston 25 News reporter Malini Basu.
And good evening. Boston 25 News spent the last year entrenched with local law enforcement as they worked to stop the flow of drugs coming into our country, our state, and our neighborhoods. It all began with a stunning trip to El Salvador to see firsthand how gang activity there sparks crime here in New England. What we saw there was eye-opening. This is our police escort for the day. Alert, finger on the trigger, scanning for anything that moves. We're heading out into the Salvadoran countryside to a gang prison.
Man, what a place for a prison.
We cram into a small office for a briefing with the commander and general director of the prison system.
Most of the people you'll see here are from Barrio 18.
En donde hay sujetos bastante peligrosos.
Many of them are extremely dangerous.
Barrio 18, or the 18th Street Gang. The prisons in El Salvador are divided by gangs for the safety of the inmates and the guards.
They have blockers outside, and they'll carry maybe about 2 miles.
We learned that all cell phone signals have been blocked because assassinations against police officers and judges were being ordered from inside of these walls. Even people who live near the prison can't make calls. As you're walking around the jail, you'll see nothing but faces covered here. Why? Because they're worried for their own protection. Our tour starts with a newer part of the prison. It's under construction to make room for the overcrowded jail. All right, so we're actually going into an area where there's tuberculosis. You can see all of us here are required to wear masks, so we're about to go inside right now. We're led into an area where people are packed into small cells. The conditions are medieval. How many of them are allowed in here at a time?
No, they're just coming in.
Okay.
They're new.
This is how deported criminals from the U.S. are welcomed back into El Salvador.
Anybody speak English?
Yes.
Anybody speak English?
There is a small commotion, and Dennis Pena appears.
You know, where are you coming from?
From New York,
Where in New York?
Bronx.
Why are you here?
I'm here in El Salvador. Got deported.
What is it like in here now?
It's El Salvador. It's a third world country. I mean, I can't really explain, no.
For a prison that is supposed to hold 500, there are over 1,800 men crammed inside here.
It's hot, we don't got water.
The stench of human waste is strong. Hundreds of men forced to live inside of one cell. David says he has family in Los Angeles.
How old were you when you joined?
13 years.
Many of these men were recruited as teenagers, some in El Salvador and some on the streets of America.
Why so young?
Sometimes it's just because our fathers and the social instability that we have in our communities.
This is where they hold the 156 women inmates who all have affiliations with the 18th Street. Patricia says she misses her family. She's in here for extortion and murder.
I have no contact with my family. I miss them, and I got a conviction of 100 years.
My mind hasn't comprehended what I just saw.
The entire experience has the Boston local law enforcement officials we traveled to El Salvador with struggling to find words.
Yeah, when I went to Cabo Verde, I thought it was bad. This is the worst I've ever seen.
It's horrifying. It's heartbreaking.
In the summer of 2016, Salvadoran native Blanca Yanez was just 18 years old when a construction worker found her bloodied and beaten body in an East Boston garage. She was murdered by who prosecutors say are 2 teens with ties to MS-13. We spoke exclusively with Yanez's heartbroken aunt.
She's the baby in the family, especially in the way they kill her. Like, it's not normal.
Later that year, the decomposed body of 16-year-old Carlos Villatoro Nunez was found stabbed to death in the Belle Isle Marsh Reservation in East Boston.
He did assault and beat Carlos Nunez with intent to murder.
19-year-old Jorge Melgar Fuentes and another man were charged with his murder. Chelsea police say both believed to have ties with MS-13.
Some of these shots were being called from jail cells in El Salvador.
Here on Chester Avenue in Chelsea, Captain Keith Houghton of the Chelsea Police Department describes a vicious attack on an 18th Street gang member a few years ago.
And the attack happened here, and the person was pretty much eviscerated.
Extreme violence is the calling card for both gangs.
The young male here was pretty much gutted.
The attacks usually involved by using a knife or machete.
The level of violence that they could inflict was honestly something we've never seen. Images that really stay with you for a long time.
Chelsea Police Chief Brian Kai says the Central American gangs started showing up in the area around the late 90s. Chelsea's population is about 75% Latino, with the majority coming from an area known as the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Kai says the gangs would recruit young Latinos, and much of the violence between MS-13 and 18th Street gang members would happen near the schools.
12, 13, 14 years old, probably the average age is probably 15 to 16.
It was around 2012 that the FBI approached Chelsea police to be a part of a task force to help take down the MS-13 gang.
We really needed to do everything that we could as a team to be able to, address that violence.
They called it Operation Mean Streets.
Our ability to be able to coordinate and collaborate amongst federal, state, and local partners is paramount.
Kais made the decision to send one of his own detectives from the gang unit down to El Salvador to gather intelligence.
We thought it was imperative to put our resources together and send some individuals down there into further investigation. That's what we did.
And the connections we made in El Salvador paved the way to more access. Boston 25 News was the only station to sit down with one of the top Drug Enforcement Administration officials on the heels of a trip to one of the most dangerous places in Mexico. Local and national law enforcement leaders from the Boston area were on that trip, and what they saw there was stunning.
So that's like the drying area. So right here, this is the finished lab right here.
Boston 25 News obtained video of a meth lab in the middle of a jungle in Mexico. It's part of the Sinaloa drug cartel.
We're getting killed with the heroin here.
Brian Boyle is the special agent in charge with the Drug Enforcement Administration in the New England area.
All the heroin that we're seeing here in Massachusetts is coming out of Mexico.
Boyle, along with nearly a dozen local and national law enforcement officers, just got back from Mexico to combat the war on drugs. Their first stop, this meth lab that was just busted.
That was producing 7 tons of meth every 3 days.
And that meth was being shipped to Massachusetts.
Most of it, from what they're saying, is right across the border. So it could be in cars, a lot of it's in tractor-trailer trucks.
Boyle and the crew risked their own lives knowing that members of the drug cartel knew about their visit. The crew was in a bulletproof truck with members of the Mexican police armed with guns.
Cartels control them, all the way up to the governors of these states. The police can't even go into certain areas of Mexico. So you have these cartels that are just running rampant in these areas.
In the end, local law enforcement officials say they just want to stop this altogether.
We really need to go further. We have to take these investigations, phone numbers, and give them off to Mexico, work with Mexican, and indict these cartel members here in the United States.
And coming up next, how a mass grave of animals in the jungle tipped off investigators searching for that meth lab, and then local police weigh in.
Anybody that can help us combat the problem, we're going to work with and cooperate with, and we appreciate their help.
And how the drugs made in those jungles are having an impact on communities right here. Plus, from Mexico and El Salvador to China, the DEA shows us the surprising way deadly fentanyl is now making its way into the Boston area when this Boston 25 News in-depth special returns. And welcome back to this Boston 25 News in-depth special. I'm Malini Basu. Nearly every day, someone in Massachusetts is losing a loved one to the opioid crisis. What these families don't know is some of these drugs are traveling more than 3,000 miles away to get here. I sat down with the DEA to find out why members of the drug cartel keep sending these drugs, these illegal drugs, to our backyard.
So right here, this is the finished lab right here.
Some of the most dangerous and deadly drugs are being made deep in this Mexican jungle.
And out of the middle of the jungle disappeared this homemade meth lab.
Local law enforcement braved temperatures soaring above 100 degrees to see this makeshift meth drug lab, controlled by the Sinaloa drug cartel, with their own eyes.
It's a very dangerous area, so when we landed, we took a Mexican military plane down.
Top leaders of the Drug Enforcement Administration, local and nationwide police chiefs took the trip.
The workers lived in these tents. Just right next to where the meth is being produced.
The DEA says meth and other drugs that are being made in Sinaloa, Mexico, are being shipped 3,000 miles away to our backyard.
You can see there's tanks and tanks and tanks of it.
They say at least 7 tons of meth are being produced every 3 days. Authorities say members of the drug cartel have been strategically smuggling it to the Boston area, right through the Mexican border.
Lawrence, Mass area is a big area where there's a big Dominican population that are actually distributing it, working directly with the Mexicans on the transportation routes.
Lawrence Police Chief Roy Vask says he's aware of the drug problem here.
Lawrence is a distribution point in this northeast area, and we recognize that. We've been working hard at that to try to drive that sort of thing out.
These drugs are so dangerous that workers are being rotated by the drug cartel.
For the workers, they only allow them to work 7 days, and that's it. And they have to get them out of there just because of the poisons and all the chemicals.
Boyle says the deadly drugs are being shipped here because the drug lords are making tens of millions of dollars from buyers in the Massachusetts area.
There's not many users in Mexico. They do not have a heroin problem. They don't have a meth problem.
And the drug lords are taking advantage of the opioid crisis here.
Like a kilo of heroin down there could be made for $500. Okay, it gets shipped up here, and in Lawrence, Massachusetts, that can go for $50,000.
Local leaders are making a vow to work hand in hand with Mexican officials to stop this rampant problem that is claiming the lives of people in our area.
Anybody that can help us combat the problem, we're going to work with and cooperate with, and we appreciate their help.
And that meth lab we showed you was busted in the spring. Investigators knew it was there because there were dozens of dead animals that piled up in one area after inhaling those toxic drugs. And it's not just gangs and cartels that are bringing narcotics into our area. We discovered deadly drugs like fentanyl can be purchased with the click of a button online, right from China, and they're shipped through the mail. It's happening all across New England. The Drug Enforcement Administration sat down with us to explain how they're trying to stop this. The United States Postal Service deals with millions of packages a day, but does the U.S. postal system know what's in each package?
There's just so much mail coming in that they try to go after the different packages.
Brian Boyle is a special agent in charge in the New England area with the Drug Enforcement Administration. Boyle says here in Massachusetts, people are able to purchase fentanyl and carfentanil on the dark web.
Fentanyl is very dangerous, and the thing is, it's very cheap when you order it through the dark web.
The drugs are being shipped by the United States postal system from China.
We're seeing a decent amount of fentanyl that comes in through the mail. They're small amounts. They're like 100 grams upwards to 500 grams.
We're trying to push the Chinese to commit to devoting the resources they'll need, personnel, dollars, to cracking down on illicit fentanyl.
One would never even know what's really in the packages because the drugs are hidden in a sophisticated way.
We've had it in electronic devices.
Here locally?
Here locally, yep. We've had it in statues, religious items. They'll stash it, they'll hollow out the insides and they'll put it in that.
A spokesperson for the USPS says postal inspectors proactively seek to identify and remove illegal drug shipments in the mail. Postal inspectors use their expertise not only to identify drug parcels, but also to identify and find the sender and recipients.
You have to know how to get around the internet. You go through the dark web, so you got to have a kind of knowledge of that. So they're educated people who are doing this.
And his arrest captivated the world. What happens now that El Chapo is locked away for good?
They have direct ties here. The Mexicans in Mexico, including Chapo Guzman's sons, have direct ties here to New England.
How the infamous cartel leader's sentencing will affect the drug war right here at home. The drug lord known as El Chapo sentenced to life in prison. Past prison escapes also forced a federal judge to bring in extra security for El Chapo's sentencing in July. The former Mexican cartel leader was ordered to pay $12 billion. That's the estimated worth of his drug operation. And we wanted to know more about what that sentencing means for the flow of drugs coming into right here, our area. So we sat down with the DEA for answers.
El Chapo, the world's most notorious drug lord, was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years and was ordered to pay $12.6 billion.
It is the end of the line, and it is a reality that he will not be able to escape.
El Chapo was the head of the Sinaloa drug cartel in Mexico.
It's a victory, really, for law enforcement, for the DEA, for all the work that the men and women of DEA have done tracking him.
The DEA tells Boston 25 News the Sinaloa drug cartel is responsible for shipping illegal and deadly drugs right here to Massachusetts. Despite El Chapo's jail time, the organization he built is still very much intact, and deadly drugs are still being shipped here to the Massachusetts area, according to the DEA.
He was single-handedly responsible for the majority of the heroin and fentanyl that comes up to New England, as well as cocaine and meth.
Brian Boyle is the special agent in charge with the Drug Enforcement Administration in the New England area. Boyle tells Boston 25 News El Chapo's sons are now running his cartel.
It was producing over 7 tons of meth on a 3-day basis, every 3 days. That meth was coming up to the United States, some of it here in New England as well.
These are all the chemicals that are being used to produce the meth.
Local and national law enforcement officers recently visited one of the meth labs in Sinaloa, which was busted by Mexican police.
They have direct ties here. The Mexicans in Mexico, including Chapo Guzman's sons, have direct ties here to New England. They're working directly with the Dominicans, many of them here in Massachusetts, setting up distribution rings.
El Chapo is expected to serve out his sentence in the same prison as Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev.
It sends a message to the drug cartels that are operating in Mexico that if you're going to continue to send poison into the streets of New England, into the United States, we're going to come after you. DEA will not stop. We're going to come after you.
And a candid interview with the head of the DEA about the future of fighting the drug on wars right here in Massachusetts.
We have 77,000 people died here in the United States, so I think we have to do more.
And the DEA in their own words on what needs to happen to save more lives when this Boston 25 News in-depth special returns. And welcome back to this Boston 25 News in-depth special. I had the opportunity to sit down with a special agent in charge of the DEA right here in New England. And I asked what's really being done to stop the drugs from flowing into our area. We have this extended answer for you. Take a listen.
They're basically taking advantage of the United States, of the problems we have here, the money to be made. They also have no regards for human life down there. I mean, the murders, there was 45,000 murders in Mexico that are drug-related last year. And these cartels are trying to get on top of each other to take advantage of the drug trade, and they're killing each other. It's a very dangerous area. So when we landed, we took a Mexican military plane down from Mexico City. We flew down there was about a 2-hour flight. We were met with armed vehicles. We were basically transported out to the valley area, which was through the valley, through the farmlands. And then we went off this dirt road for probably about a half hour through a dirt road. And out of the middle of the jungle disappeared this homemade meth lab that was there. It was massive. It was amazing just to see how much could be produced there. The living conditions as well. They'll work 12-hour shifts, and then after 7 days they send them out of there and bring a new crew of workers into the place.
How long did they think that lab was there for?
They said probably it's been there about 6 months, and that's the meth that's coming up into the United States. But they also have these heroin fentanyl labs as well, similar in size, similar in production, that are popping up all through Mexico as well. There's a lot of issues in Mexico as far as corruption, the violence like I spoke about, the corruption angle. There's states in Mexico that are drug control, cartels control them. We're doing a great job here in New England as far as seizing drugs. We have record amounts of seizures, we're locking people up, but we really need to go further. I mean, we have 77,000 people died here in the United States. So I think we have to do more. So I think the message is we have to kind of further our investigations, go after the Mexicans, indict them here in the United States, and bring them to justice here on the U.S. soil.
And remember, you can watch all of our in-depth coverage whenever you want. Just download the Boston 25 News app on your Roku, Fire Stick, Smart TV, or other streaming devices. Thank you for joining this Boston 25 News in-depth special looking at international moves being made right here to keep our streets safe. I'm Molly Basu. Have a great night.